Dvorak is back, and he's looking to get back into the win column after dropping his first 2 fights in a row in his entire pro MMA career. Gone is a 16-fight win streak for the man out of the Czech Republic. And in on short notice steps AstroBoy Steven Erceg out of Australia. He's from Perth, Western Australia. Just an MMA hotbed all of a sudden. He's a guy that represents Wilkes MMA, but he also cross-trains at Scrappy. And you know Scrappy for Jack Della Maddalena up at 170. So a lot of great things going on the West Coast, a place where Yoel Romero kissed Luke Rockhold in the mouth.
They had an intimate moment in front of all of us.
UFC 221. But when I look at this matchup, Matt, I mean, if you know Steven Erceg, well, you probably do. I mean, it's not crazy and outside of the realm of possibility that you already recognize him because he fought with Hex. He's 7-0 with Eternal. He is their flyweight champ. A little bit of experience here and there at bantamweight. And I think the craziest thing out of AstroBoy's overall career is that already established as a pro, he somehow competes in amateur matches at GAMMA, the Global Mixed Martial Arts Organization tournament. And I'll throw it up there because in 2019, he goes through the tournament. At the end, he fights fellow UFC flyweight, now all of a sudden, Denis Bondar, old psycho. And in that one, Erceg loses. And if you go and you look at some of the pictures, I found one on Steven's Facebook page, they're wearing like the big gloves and they're wearing the shin pads as well. So it's not like we're going out there and landing elbows or anything crazy. So Steven doesn't get it done there. But that's all right, because that's a pretty darn good fighter. But as a pro for Erceg, I went down through and watched every single fight in meticulous order. And for me, it really surprised me. He's got 2 really big names on his pro record. 1 win over with Hex against the former, or the recent, road to UFC finalist, and that is Sunguk Choi, who wasn't able to get it done over Park. And in that one, first round, fairly competitive. Round 2, round 3, it is Erceg taking it down to the mat and just controlling overall. And if you look at it for Erceg, when he wins his eternal flyweight strap, he beat Shannon Ross, and he finished him by rear naked choke, drops him with the right hand, and then gets down on the ground and gets that submission win. There's so many positives to go through it with Steven Erceg. He's going to be one of the biggest flyweights you're ever going to find at 5'9". But the craziest part about it, for as big and as muscular and as powerful as Erceg is with his takedowns, he marches guys down in almost a square stance. He drops back on the center line and drops his hands every time. And I can count it on 2 hands the amount of times Erceg's been dropped by right hands against his opponents. But by the jeepers, he's got 9 wins. And
he's one of those bend but don't break kind of guys. He's like the Colts defense when they had Peyton Manning. Because when Erceg is able to land his own strikes, and if you just watch them in a vacuum and kind of eliminate some of the strikes he's absorbing, he's not like a terrible striker. Like, he's not some negative striker on the field.
Really good inside leg kick. He attacks the calf on the outside, too.
And a good right hand, too, and he's able to land it straight. He can land it as a hook, too. And that's why I do think he's a very dangerous fight for Dvorak to be taking, because David doesn't really have to take this fight at this stage of his career. I guess maybe he does because he's lost 2 in a row, but still, this is a guy who, to a lot of MMA fans, is still kind of a known commodity in the division.
And that's because this fight was originally supposed to be not Mateus. It was supposed to be Matt Schnell, who's ranked 8th, against the number 10, David Dvorak, and ultimately Schnell's out of the fight. And Erceg, who was supposed to fight Clayton Carpenter a few weeks ago, now Erceg gets this shot against a 10th ranked fighter in a big division.
This is what I really like about this fight, though. Steven is a guy who's going to move forward and really pressure David Dvorak in this matchup. David's one of these fighters, so it really comes down to how does he deal with that pressure? Because if he is able to mix his martial arts, throw the jab out there to kind of blind him, go for the takedowns, be dominant in that top position, I can see him winning this fight. But in some of David's fights we have seen, when he's on the back foot, when he's forced to make those decisions in fast time, when he's not the one leading the dance, he will freeze, he will have that deer in headlight syndrome, and if we see him get cracked by a big right hand, I wouldn't be surprised. Now, saying he gets submitted is a bit of a stretch, right? Like, David Dvorak is a very talented grappler in his own right, but still, if Erceg's able to get his back and just get into some of those dominant positions, it's going to make David Dvorak that much less likely to try to implement his own wrestling as this fight continues. And Dvorak's the guy who, when he implements all of his game, that's when it all really opens up. When he's forced to just strike, when he's forced to just wrestle, that's when he does put out these limited performances.
And Dvorak's one of those guys that you saw the 16-fight win streak, you saw him get to the top of the mountain with Octagon before he came into the UFC. He's so fast.
He
I
is.
mean, he's lightning fast. And you look at the last 2 losses, he gets dropped by that creepy, and I mean creepy. He gets put on skates against Mateus Nicolau like it was Jamal Crawford who was just landing crossovers.
Nicolau can bang, though, to be fair.
In the NBA, and so Nicolau is able to land that big shot against Dvorak. He kind of wobbles back, and after that, he rallies, and it's not so bad, but he ultimately ends up losing that fight. And then he goes out there against Manel Kopp, and he gets hit quite a few times to the fact that he's behind the black lines, Kopp's really pressuring him, and Dvorak, other than having good wrestling in that fight, wasn't able to really implement his offensive striking. So if you do go down through it, you look at both of these guys. For Dvorak, very well-rounded, speed's a big advantage. He definitely has the volume advantage in a fight like this because Erceg will throw the jab out there a little bit. He will throw the leg kicks, as I had mentioned, and he will throw a really nice right cross. And every now and again, he'll set himself up and wait and bait and then throw that nice left hook. You saw that when he fought Paul Loga in a fight where he fought Paul Loga twice. The first Loga fight. Loga goes overhand right, and it lands on Steven's chin. He goes overhand right, and it lands on Steven's chin. He does it 3 times. And Steven, bend but don't break. He stands up, and then he ultimately lands that left hook. That is his only knockout win. So for me, Erceg's one of those guys, like we had Jesse Butler coming in on short notice last weekend against Jim Miller. I don't think Erceg's out like a fish out of water like Butler was against Miller.
Unless you're a top 15 fighter, you can't beat Jim Miller on 2 days' notice.
That was a Thursday call-in to fight on Saturday, and thank goodness for Butler, he made the weight, but I thought he was dead, and I yelled and woke up the dogs and my wife.
But Jim Miller's still that guy.
Yeah, when it comes down to this matchup, again, Erceg, he got dropped by Tim Moore. He got outstruck by Mark Familiari before he got the fight down to the mat. The fight that he had against Cody Haddon was at bantamweight after quite a bit of a time away. And in that one, even though Cody Haddon's 2-0, those two guys train together now, so that's pretty cool. Saw that on the Instagram of Erceg. But in that matchup, that was a fight of the night. It was back and forth. Haddon's really landing on Erceg. Erceg has to rally back again, and in the third round, it really was all Erceg. I scored at 29-28 for Erceg. And then his last time out against Soichiro Hirai, familiar or kind of looked a lot like Dvorak on the outside. He's kind of lunging around. He is a southpaw. And then he tries to duck in for a punch. And as he ducks, then Steven's able to go in there, grab the back, pull the fight down to the mat. It was a bodyweight takedown. And Erceg gets the submission. So out of this one, I definitely think that Erceg is the better grappler. And that might sound silly if you go back and watch those Dvorak performances. When he was with Octagon, he was a king of the scrambles. We just haven't seen it in the UFC. But I think for Erceg, size-wise, performance-wise, with all of the submission wins and the fact that he holds guys down. He doesn't let them get back up, other than the Haddon fight, who's really gone on to do some nice things. So I think this is a really good fight. Dvorak is a slight favorite in the matchup. I'm really eager to see what the fans are thinking on Tapology for a total vote. I'll let you set the total on this one.
I think Dvorak's going to be favored by 70% of the fans.
I'm going to say over 70%, and it is over. So 457 total votes, 85% Dvorak, 79% by decision for the 15% that have Erceg predictably, 51% by decision, 44% by submission. And for me, Matt, going back through, watching all the tape, I mean, Steven Erceg, going out to fight a bantamweight fight against Haddon, had a shirt that said "Flyweights are friends, not food."
I think the Clayton Carpenter fight would have been good.
I think the Carpenter fight would have been good as well. I like Erceg, and he's a welcome addition to the UFC. I think for me, he's going to struggle with the speed of David Dvorak on the outside, the movement of a guy like Dvorak. I could be wrong. But I do think Dvorak's going to be out there and having success with his strikes in this matchup.
I have Dvorak in this fight, and I'm going to zag a little bit on one thing you said. I think Erceg can be the better grappler if he gets the top position. I do think Dvorak can get the top spot and maybe out-wrestle Erceg in some positions. I'm not saying he's going to for, minutes at a time. Erceg's a very dangerous fighter on the ground, but I still think David can go in there and implement his wrestling attack without being in complete fear of just like the floor is lava type situation.
And that was it. The fight that Erceg had against Tim Moore, there were a lot of whizzer throws, and Moore looked like he was going to have success with the grappling, and he didn't. The only guy in the pro career, other than Sean Gauchi over with Hex, who is still a Hex champ right now to this moment. So that's a forgivable loss on the record of a guy like Erceg. But the only other guy that had success with the grappling was Cody Haddon again. He was able to mount offensive takedowns. He ran out of steam in the third round, but there's no sweat in that. Both of us going with the Undertaker, David Dvorak, in the matchup. A big time fight. Really want to hear from you down below in the comments section on this one. It should be a lot of fun at flyweight. Some big fights on the card, including Charles Oliveira taking on Beneil Dariush in the co-main event. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.